In my previous video, I talked about Heated Rivalry's Season 1 ending and compared it to the endings of the book, the final chapter, the epilogue, and the epilogue prologue, which was actually a bonus story titled My Dinner with Hayden that was published as part of the book's 2023 second edition publication. In particular, I focused on the ending of the bonus story because after Ilya and Shane have dinner with Hayden and his wife Jackie, the two go to bed to be intimate with one another. And just as Ilya is preparing himself to put on a condom, Shane advises him not to do that, which, of course, Ilya is more than happy to comply with. This is something that really struck me. And in fact, I would say it was a catalyst for almost all of the videos that I've done so far and a lot of the videos that I will do. And I talked about it as on a literary level, the way that that decision symbolized, greater trust and commitment to one another, the monogamy. But I also talked about like the symbolism behind it, it being an act of pregnancy and that, it was symbolic of them not only getting pregnant but getting ready to sort of like birth this love child, the charity that basically creates the family unit. In this video, though, I want to actually go to an earlier scene. I want to go to the first time Ilya and Shane have penetrative sex. And I want to talk about the way in which condom use is both emphasized and, in particular, visualized. Okay. And for me, this is really important because not only does it say something about the characters, given that at this point in time it was, I think, a 5 to 6 year difference between the first time they engaged in this penetrative act and their decision to kind of you know basically get pregnant and give birth to their love child. But because the conversations around condom use and the lack thereof are very deeply embedded in gay male culture, gay and queer male culture, sexuality, sociality, and it'll form a bit of a foundation for the future videos that I want to create, where I talk about the context of the show, and situate it within a history of gay and queer male representation, as well as the discourse, the conversations that are happening around the show here and now. So this video is like an addendum to the first 4 videos that together form the first set of videos that focus on the differences between the TV show and the book. And it's a bridge as well to the next set of videos where I'm going to be taking a step back and focusing more on context and discourse. All right, so let's get into it. So in episode 2 of Heated Rivalry, the TV show, Ilya takes a taxi to Shane's private residence, basically his hookup den, and is met in the back alley, in the back stairwell, and then is taken up to his really, really, really beautiful apartment, and where Ilya refers to him as Mr. Real Estate, Mr. Landlord. And in the book, we find out that Shane basically owns this property now, just so that he can host Ilya there for fun in privacy. And so this scene here, this is the first time that the two engage in penetrative sex. And before the two basically jump into the act itself, Ilya ends up pulling out like a roll of condoms and makes a joke about it and says, like, is this, do you think this is going to be enough, injecting a bit of comedy before the heat really turns up. And that scene in particular is, ooh, it's pretty hot, it's pretty spicy. But it's something that really struck me. It really stuck out to me that they made this entire visual display of the condoms, and it surprised me for a couple of reasons. So one, rarely is condom use ever represented in movies or TV shows. Like, it's never really discussed. It's something that maybe is assumed, or maybe it's something that is discussed maybe after the fact, or maybe even shown briefly after the fact, but it usually has like a narrative purpose, right? There's usually a reason for showing, and emphasizing the condom. It's not something that's done just sort of willy-nilly. Like, there's usually a reason to emphasize that condoms were used in this particular act. And here in this TV show, at least seemingly, there's no real narrative purpose behind it, but I'll get into that in a second. At the same time, though, it didn't really surprise me, right? Because this is a sex act that was happening between two men, right? And given the history of, HIV and HIV transmission, and of course the AIDS epidemic, I think that Jacob Tierney and Rachel Reed were both really smart in emphasizing condom use, emphasizing safer sex between these two characters, because I think that if they hadn't, and in particular in the TV show, if they hadn't emphasized and shown the physical condom, I think that there would have been some blowback. Right? I think there would have been some blowback. I think there would have been some negative criticism, just again, given the history of condom use in the gay male and queer male community, and of course the legacy and the ghost of HIV that's is still being transmitted to this day, not at the same level, but still exists. And so it was smart because um, it allowed us to just kind of focus on these sex scenes, because we weren't distracted by maybe the reality of STI transmissions. And so I thought it was really smart because it it was a way in which both Tierney and Reed sort of acknowledge the eyes behind the fourth wall. I think it was something that was very strategic, that was done to acknowledge that there's an audience that's going to be consuming this. Because don't forget, this show in particular was created for a mainstream audience. It was created by and funded by Crave. And so even though it wasn't necessarily expected to be the gigantic international sensation that it is now, it was created for a mainstream audience. So it was smart, right? Because it knew that there would have been blowback, in particular from the gay and queer male community, had these two decided not to use condoms, especially since it's suggested that this is um, Shane's first time bottoming. I think it would have been too real. I think it would have just uh, taken us out of the fantasy of this sex act in a really weird way had condoms not been used, because we would have been focusing on, like, oh, he's not using a condom. What about HIV? We don't know what these people are doing. And it also would have represented them maybe as, irresponsible. Right. And so I think that we would have been distracted from the really hot sex scene and some of the previous ones and ones that happened afterward as well. So I think it was very smart that they did it. I think it was smart that they made it so overt as well. And again, I think it was an acknowledgement of the audience, and a really good way to kind of bypass some messy conversations that are based in reality. It would have almost broken the suspension of disbelief in a weird way had they not used condoms, because I think it would have pulled us in different conversations about STIs and this and that. And again, don't forget, there's also two women in the show that were engaging sexually with these men as well. And so I think it would have, it allowed them to very strategically bypass some of the messiness by portraying them in this way and say, yep, they're being responsible, they're being safe, they're using protection, and now you can just kind of focus on the hotness of their erotic encounter. At the same time, though, I think it's important that we situate this sex act in a chronology, right? And I think this is really important because in the book, the first time they engage in penetrative sex happens in 2011, but in the TV show it happens in 2013. But something happens in 2012 that I would say fundamentally changes and has changed gay male culture, sexuality, and sociality. And I'm talking about the advent of PrEP. So, what is PrEP, and why am I placing such important emphasis on it and such important emphasis on the timelines in the book and TV show? PrEP stands for pre exposure prophylaxis, right? It is a condom of sorts, but it is a chemical, not a physical condom, okay? And it is 99.7, but really almost 100% effective at preventing the transmission of HIV. PrEP has fundamentally altered gay male culture, gay male politics, gay male sexuality, gay male sociality. At the time when PrEP came out, which in the United States it was in 2012, but in Canada it wasn't officially sort of recognized by the federal government until 2016. So it was only available like provincially in a kind of hodgepodge fashion, just depending on what provinces had um, decided to whether to recognize it or not, and so on and so forth. But in Canada, it wasn't until 2016. But in the United States in 2012, when it made its debut, there was a lot of anxiety about PrEP because, again, for decades, condom use. Every time you have sex, you put on a condom. This was something that was ingrained and drilled into gay and queer male uh, the gay and queer male psyche, into gay and queer people's minds, right? You have sex, you use a condom, safe for sex, protect yourself, protect the community, protect other people. This is how you stop the transmission of HIV, which had continued for decades, even though the AIDS epidemic kind of ended in 1996, when AIDS was no longer a death sentence with the advent of um, what we called the AIDS cocktail in 1996. So PrEP wasn't the same as the invention of the AIDS cocktail in 1996, but it definitely did fundamentally alter gay male sexuality, as I said, and culture. But there was a lot of anxiety because it was foreseen, a lot of gay and queer men wore condoms primarily to stop the transmission of HIV. Other STIs, not so much so. So there was a lot of anxiety in the epidemiological community. There was a lot of anxiety within the broader gay and queer male community about what would happen if the condom was slowly sort of like removed, and everyone switched from the visual condom, the physical condom, to this invisible chemical one, right? There's in particular an issue of trust, right? How do you know that this person is actually taking PrEP, or that this person is being fully regimented in the process? And it's a lot more complicated than that, but there was a lot of anxiety at the time. But it fundamentally altered gay male sexuality and gay male culture. And so I think here, in this particular instance, given that these sex acts are happening just before and just after PrEP, visualizing the condom just makes a lot of sense. Even though condom use wasn't uniform, and again, there were a lot of tensions from within the community. Some people being vehement about using condom use every time, but there were others that said, "No, I'm tired of it. Condom fatigue. I don't want to do it anymore. I'll deal with the consequences. There's other ways to avoid, HIV." And a lot of people who fell somewhere in between, right? Um, so it does make sense, given that this act is happening in and around the prep era, that they are sort of using condoms. And again, it portrays the characters as like socially responsible, self-care as a form of communal care. It's acknowledging the audience. I think that it makes a lot of sense. But beyond the context of how people would respond to these images, and beyond the context of PrEP and visualizing the condom as it's related to the reality of gay and queer male sexuality, I think that condom use in this instance says something more about the characters, and in particular the relationship to each other, as well as the relationship to their own sexuality, that warrants a bit more depth, and a bit of a closer look at. So the show is set between 2008 and 2017. It starts with Ilya and Shane meeting each other for the first time outside of the hockey rink, the skating rink in Regina, and ends at, essentially, even in the book, at the cottage in the summer of 2017. Although, as I mentioned in the book, there are a few additional endings that take us actually into 2018, 2019. This is really important because if this book was set, and if the TV show was set in a contemporary sort of period, because it was filmed and released in 2025. So if the show was set in, let's say, 2025, or if it ended in 2025 and it went back maybe about 10 years to, let's say, 2015 or so, I think that there would have been a very different relationship to condom use and to safer sex, right? Because we could have assumed by 2020, They would meet in 2020, in 2015. The first time they would engage would have been in 2019, 2020, pretending that COVID didn't happen. We could have assumed that these individuals maybe were on PrEP if they weren't so overt in the representation of condom use. But at the same time, I actually don't think that PrEP would have made sense in the context of this show at all, or it's something that we would have assumed as an audience. And there's a couple of reasons for it. One, condom use is something that allows someone to sort of have fun on the go, right? Condom use goes hand in hand with a lack of commitment, in the sense that you bring condoms with you, you use them, you apply them and take them off and dispose of them. And it's a use as you need, use as you go sort of like basis, right? It allows one to sort of be open and flexible. There's a freedom to condom use that, oddly enough, PrEP doesn't afford, right? Because PrEP actually requires a commitment to PrEP, right? So for those of you who are unaware, in order to get a prescription for PrEP, you actually have to get tested. You have to do blood work every 3 months for, STIs and HIV and all of that. And your prescription is only for 3 months at a time. And you have to take PrEP every single day. Now, granted, in the last year or so, there was a vaccine, not a vaccine, a needle that you could take. I think it's once every 2 months, but for all intents and purposes, we can just say that it's a daily medication you have to take. So it needs to happen at the same time every day. It's very regimented. PrEP is a commitment. Condoms are not a commitment. Condoms you just use for the time that you need them, and then you're done. PrEP is something you have to do whether you're having sex or not. So in the context of the show, I think either or both of these individuals going on PrEP would have uh, suggested a much stronger acknowledgement. It would have forced them to acknowledge their sexuality in a way that either of them were really ready to do, in particular Shane. But it also would have acknowledged a greater commitment to one another. Again, that either of them were willing to acknowledge, but in particular, I would say, no, that's not true. Shane and Ilya as well, right? So think about it. Ilya maybe more so because he seemed to be more sexual, but also more confident and open with his sexuality. He let Svetlana know, he had his relationship with Sasha, and so on and so forth. But Shane was much more deeply in the closet than Ilya, right? Much more uncomfortable with his sexuality, I would say, than Ilya. So I cannot, and again, Shane is also the bottom, right? He's the hole, not the peg. I can't believe I actually just made a circle with my hands. But anyways, so I can't imagine thinking that if these guys weren't using condoms, that I would not assume that they were on PrEP, because I could not imagine Shane being like, okay, I'm going to go to the doctor. I'm going to tell this doctor that I want to go on PrEP, which is coded and still largely seen as a medication for gay and queer men. That's not to say that bi and pan and straight individuals, identified individuals, don't go on PrEP, but it's still largely seen as like largely a gay male but queer male sort of medication as well, because again, it only protects against HIV and not other STIs, and not against pregnancy at all. So I can't imagine Shane going to this doctor and being like, hey, I want to go on PrEP. And then he has to go back every 3 months to do blood work. And he has to take a pill every day just so that he could hook up with his rival crush, like once every few weeks, or, once every, few months, right? It would have been a much greater acknowledgement of his gay male sexuality as a bottom that he would have wanted to have admitted to himself and would have been able to admit, right? Because that's what it would have been. To have to undertake that kind of regimented process would have been an admission that, like, I'm gay and I like to bottom. And I don't think he was ready to do that. And it would have also been a greater commitment to Ilya, because unlike Ilya, who was going out and sleeping, who's bisexual and was, sleeping with other women, he really, as we saw during some of these uncomfortable scenes with Rose, in the TV show at least, Shane is very much, self-identifies as gay, and so he would have only been taking this medication just to be with Ilya, even though in the book, it's mentioned that he hooked up with two other people, one in Mexico and one in a bar or somewhere in Los Angeles. Really, he would have been taking this just so that he could be intimate with Ilya, and I don't think he was ready to admit that, especially in the book, where in the opening chapter, when after they're finished sort of being intimate with one another, after they finish having sex with each other, Shane says something to the effect of like, I really hate Ilya. I can't wait to be done with him in this relationship or whatever. Like, neither of them were really ready for that until basically the end of 2016 and 2017 with the tunnel conversation and the concussion that happened in the hospital and so on and so forth. So it's funny how in the earlier context of the book, condom use is a representation of the barrier between these two. It provides them with an alibi that they're not really gay, that they're not really into, each other. It provides them that alibi, that barrier. It's symbolic of this barrier between these two, and in particular for Shade, between him and his sexuality, right? And so, of course, at the end of the book, when they are more committed to each other, taking off the condom, it breaks down that barrier, right? It that symbolic barrier between the two disappears, and of course, I mean, by that point, they've had admitted to themselves and to a few other people, that they were gay or that they were, openly queer, bi, etc., etc. But it carries a very different meaning, obviously, at the end. So I just think it's really interesting that something as like a 3 second, seemingly throwaway scene that was actually sort of wrapped up in comedy, wrapped up to be something comedic, says something so much more about the characters and is so connected to all of these other conversations and realities for gay and queer men. PrEP, safer sex, I don't want to say promiscuity because that sounds very judgmental, but it's actually tied to a lot of greater issues. And again, this idea of like reality and fantasy that is endemic within a lot of queer representation I'm going to talk about in the next set of videos. Because like, as I mentioned, had they not used condoms at that time in 2011 and 13, we wouldn't have assumed that they were on PrEP. And so I think that our relationship to the characters and the sex would have been very different. It would have taken us out of the fantasy and brought us too much into reality. And again, if these representations had been set 5 years in the future, we could have maybe assumed that they were on PrEP, so the need to visualize these condoms wouldn't have been as pertinent. And yet, as I've suggested here, it wouldn't really have worked or made any sense because of who these characters are and their relationship to themselves and to each other. Okay, so this brings us to the end of this video, as well as the first set of videos where I discuss the differences between the TV show and the books. And if you made it through this episode, congratulations. And if you made it through all of the episodes, a thank you and a congratulations, because I know that my analysis of the TV show may not necessarily have been what you expected in some instances. A lot of the conversations have seemingly sidestepped some of the conversations around sex, even though everyone's kind of talking about sex, but maybe they haven't talked about it in the way that I have. And I know that, again, depending on how you identify and your own relationship to representations of gay and queer male sexuality, it may have made you a little bit uncomfortable, or maybe you absolutely loved it. I'm not entirely sure. So yeah, I'd love actually to hear your thoughts in the comments of what you thought about this video, as well as maybe some of the previous videos as well. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. I hope that you found what I said to be at least a little bit different than what other people have been talking about. I hope you like some of the more abstract and conversations about like some of the symbolic aspects of the show, like the tunnelless womb, getting pregnant and giving birth to this this love child, how a 3 second clip of condoms can say so much about the characters and be connected to so many complex realities that the gay and queer men have to experience on a daily basis. Yeah, I hope that you enjoyed the first set of videos, and I hope that you will join me in the next set of videos that I'm planning on doing, which will focus on, as I said earlier, the context of the show, in particular how this show carries on a legacy of gay and queer male sexuality and identity in mainstream culture and what it means to penetrate and enter the mainstream and the conversations that happen around it. And here I'm thinking of, well, Brokeback Mountain, of course, that was released 20 years ago. 20 years ago. Brokeback Mountain was my coming out movie. I'll talk about that more in the next set of videos. And of course, Queer as Folk, which in the UK came out in the late 90s. In the late 90s. And the American version came out in the very early 2000s, which was filmed here in Toronto, by the way. So there's something about, filming gay stuff in Toronto that just makes it really popular, and yeah, that just makes it really mainstream. So, keep on filming that stuff here. And I also want to talk a bit about the context of the show, some of the conversations that are happening online, the fandom articles that have been published. A lot of people have been talking about the show, obviously, and I want to dissect that a little bit. And I also plan on hosting some conversations online, but also in my podcast with friends, with other people that I've met online about their thoughts about the show, because there are many different perspectives that are sort of colliding with one another. So the next set of videos is going to take a step back from the text, where I focus just on the book and the TV show. And it's going to be looking more at, like what I did in this video, talking more about context, right? Situating the show in different genres. In particular, I'm also thinking of like the coming out genre. There's Heartstoppers that was just released, the teen coming out movie, even though these men aren't teenagers, although they start off as teenagers. So lots more content to come. So again, thank you for watching. Please do comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video, on previous videos, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what else you'd like for me to talk about. I think by this point you've gotten a sense of like my perspective of who I am and how I approach things. So if there's anything you want to hear, let me know. And yes, of course, please do like and subscribe, because as an independent content creator, it gives me the motivation to keep on creating, and it also allows me to know that what I'm creating out there is being received and matters, and that people like it. So yeah, please do comment and like and subscribe. So until then, please stay heated.